Ronnie, what branch of the service were you in?
I was in the Navy.
What was your highest rank?
I was a third class petty officer, equipment operator, third class.
What general locations did you serve in?
When I first went into the service, I went to boot camp in Gulfport, Mississippi. From there, after boot camp, I was transferred to Davisville, Rhode Island, awaiting further transfer. And from that point, I went to San Salvador Island in the Bahamas and served there for approximately 6 months. Served on the what they call the Public Works Department of the base, so we actually took care of the base. It was a very small naval facility on the island. And our job was to actually take apart the base, and we turned it over. When we left, we turned it over to the Bahamian government, and that was in early 1970. From there, I went to Port Hueneme, California, awaiting further transfer there to Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 3, which at that time was serving in Okinawa. I wound up staying in Port Hueneme and served various functions on the base, working on different projects there. One of the jobs I did was accounting for equipment that was being rehabbed and ready to be sent back to Vietnam. So we used to go out into these huge fields where thousands of pieces of various types of construction equipment and trucks, things like that, were all there, and we would have to make sure it was ready to be shipped out. It was called the shipping and receiving area, and then at some point an order would come in and we'd have to bring certain pieces of equipment down to the docks for shipping. It was a pretty interesting job, and the fact that we got to see all the different pieces of equipment that I would later see when I went into actually went to the battalion. At some point, I was in the summer of 1970. The battalion came back, and I joined the battalion and went into training with them. Some of the training that I did, I went to a well driller school for 4 or 5 weeks, and so when I finished that, I was able to work on a well drilling team, but I never did. But most of the guys that I went to the school with were on the well drilling team, and when we did go to Vietnam, they went around and drilled wells, water wells, throughout the countryside. But I was sent to a crane operator. I was sent to the crane operating section of the battalion when we got to Vietnam, and I worked on a lot of bridges. One of the things that happened prior to us getting there, there had been a big monsoon, and a lot of the bridges had been washed out, so we were replacing a lot of bridges and fixing up the sides of the roads for traveling. Then at one point I got sent to the very northern part of Vietnam, a place called Qua Viet, which was just a few miles south of the demilitarized zone. And we stayed there on a Navy base, a Vietnamese Navy base. And we stayed there for about 3 months, I guess, working on building a big pier. And during that time, there was an action going on. I believe that they were invading Cambodia or Laos. I can't remember which. There was what's called Lam Sam 719 was the name of the battle. I didn't participate in the battle, but all the equipment that was going and the troops and stuff would come up the river past us as we were located right at the head of the river on the South China Sea. So we did see a lot of boats go by us with equipment that was eventually being shipped over during this campaign. From that point, we went back to the U.S. and I stayed at Port Hueneme for several months till I was discharged on November the 1st, 1971.
Let's go back to how you got in the service. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
Well, I was on the verge of being drafted, and I had been had gone down to New Haven to they would send you down for a physical, and I had already been down for my second physical and passed it. So the next thing would have been we were being inducted into the Army. At that point, I received a phone call from the Navy recruiter in Torrington. And the Navy recruiter actually lived here in Norfolk. His name was Dick Boyclair. And he had read something on they must get some report out of some test or something you take down there when you go for your physical. And he said, well, I shouldn't waste my time going into the Army and so on and so forth. And I thought, well, I told him, I said, well, the only one thing I like about it, it's 2 years and I'll be done with it. And he said, well, we do have some programs in the Navy that are 2 years or so, and if you qualified, you might be able to do that. So I told him at the time had been working in construction work, so I was familiar with construction, and he said that was one of the programs was the Seabees. So at some point I went down he took me down to New York to interview with some lieutenant commander in New York City to see if I was qualified, and he found out that I was qualified. And I'd also gotten a letter at that time from former Navy Captain Tony Pasquarello, who I had done a lot of jobs with, working with, and he was from Torrington, and he sent me a letter to the recruiter, and also I had to get a letter from my employer at the time, who sent a letter explaining the duties that I did, so on and so forth. So I wound up joining the Navy, which was glad I did. So I certainly enjoyed the time that I was there and did something that I'd like to do.
Do you recall the date you joined?
My actual first day of service was on the 2nd of July, 1969.
And were you living in Norfolk at that time?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
After you enlisted, how long before you actually left the boot camp?
I initially enlisted back in April, and so I was actually belonged to the Navy Reserve. There was no activity; it was inactive reserves. But I was sometime in April. I actually joined and signed up. And then I had to wait from then until July the 2nd, and then I got orders to go to Gulfport, Mississippi for training. That was where I did my boot camp.
How long was boot camp?
I believe it was 5 or 6 weeks.
And what kinds of things did they teach you there? What was that like?
Well, it was very limited, I guess. Since all the people who were there were Seabees, there were no other Navy people, so we were just Seabees who were there at boot camp, and we were all at least third class. So we got third class was in E4, so we got in an advanced rate, and some people in there were second class and first class. Some had prior service, so we actually went through the usual stuff. I guess you would go through teaching you about the Seabees, about the Navy. I don't know what else. One thing we did not do there at all, we had no weapons training. So we did actually have no training at all there for any weapons. And that we would get later on when we went to a battalion, and we would have our military training there, as they called it. But we did not have any of that at boot camp. So it was a shortened period of time.
Was boot camp mostly classroom, in the field, or a combination?
I guess it was a combination. You know, every week we took some kind of a test. We had some kind of a test we took every week, and oddly enough, I wound up being the honor man of the boot camp company or whatever, or the Scholastic Honor Man, I think they call it. So I was the first of the class. Big deal.
Do you recall any of your instructors?
Oh yeah, my boot camp company commander was equipment operator first class Rush was his name, and later on, just before I got out of the service, I did wound up. He actually went to MCV3, and I wound up seeing him again, but that was the only time I ever met him. And there were other ones there. There was some guy named Fisher. He was petty officer first class Fisher, I believe. And I can't recall any of the other ones. The one reason I recall the guy Fisher, I did run into him later on also. And while I was in Port Wayne, and to him the Navy was the greatest thing in the world. He made the comment that, well, where else can you have a rack to sleep in, 3 square meals a day, and a roof over your head? Where every day is a holiday and every meal is a banquet. That's what he used to say. Didn't quite feel that way myself, but anyway, a lot of these guys were from the South, and they really, it was probably a good thing for them.
Did you have a graduation from boot camp?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they had a ceremony that they put on. We were all there, and they gave us. That's when I got the award of the Scholastic, whatever it was called, being the top of the class.
Where did you go after the graduation?
After the graduation, actually that night, we wound up. This other fellow and I went to New Orleans, and we stayed there. We brought our sea bags because we were being transferred at that point to Davisville, Rhode Island. So we brought our sea bags up to the airport, and then we went downtown New Orleans and spent quite a bit of time down there having a good time. Because during boot camp we weren't allowed to get out anywhere and do anything. So it was, the first time in 5 or 6 weeks that we've been able to get out and enjoy ourselves. So anyway, the result of it was we put the bags into the baggage for shipping, on our flight, which was going out at 10:30 at night. Well, about 10:15, we were still in downtown New Orleans. So we found a taxi and told them our plight, and the guy said, "Well, it's okay." He said, "It's 17 miles to the airport." So needless to say, we missed the flight. But our baggage had all got shipped up to New York, up to Kennedy. So they said, "Well, there is one good thing. There is a plane leaving in a few minutes that goes to Newark." So they transferred our tickets and we got a plane to Newark. So when we got to Newark, we had to find a taxi. And we got a taxi to take us from there up to JFK. And the guy I was with was from New Jersey, so he actually took the taxi back once we got our baggage. And he went back to New Jersey, and I waited there for a flight in the morning to Hartford. And I got a flight up to Hartford, and my mother and father picked me up. And I went home for a few days, and I reported, I believe, the next weekend to Davisville.
How long did you stay at Davisville?
Well, probably about 3 weeks, I guess. And, when you went there was just a bunch of people there and all kind of in the same boat. We were supposed to go to MCB 58, which was home ported in Davisville. However, the word was that they were going to be decommissioned, so there was going to be no more MCB 58. So from there, they got a group of people and transferred us to the island of San Salvador.
The 3 weeks that you were at Davisville, did you have any duties?
Oh yeah, you had to report for duty every day, and then they would give you some job to do. You could have been barracks cleanup or some other thing. I remember one of the fine jobs we did. There was some kind of a big ceremony that was going on, and there was a big parade. So they had set up all these bleachers along the parade ground so people could sit there and watch the parade. And they told us to paint the bleachers. So somebody went over somewhere and they got some 5 gallons of paint. Of course, they didn't give us any brushes. So, excuse me, we had to take the paint and we kind of just dumped it on the bleachers a little bit at a time, then took a rag or something and spread it on there. You know, actually it looked pretty nice. Well, then we ran out of paint and they said, well, let me see, that was water-based paint. Here we have some oil-based paint. So then we took some oil-based paint and did the same thing. So we painted all these bleachers with this, it must have been an olive drab was the color, I'm sure, some great color. So anyway, that they had a practice rehearsal for the parade that evening, I guess, and all these people who were, dependents of the career designated people, or lifers, as we would call them, the people who have been in the service for 20 years. They all came to watch, and the next day, of course, they sat down in the bleachers, and the paint hadn't quite dry. So we saw where they had taken and put napkins and stuff like that to sit on, newspapers and stuff to sit on, so they wouldn't get paint all over their clothes. So anyway, the parade went off fine, and that was one of the memorable things that I remember being in Davisville. And we actually stayed where I actually lived. There was at Quonset Point, which was the Naval Air Station there. And then we used to have to take a bus back and forth, or a cattle car or something like that to Davisville.
After your time there at Davisville, you went to San Salvador, what were your duties there?
There I was attached to the Public Works Department for the base, so we had to take care of the base, the running of the day-to-day running of the base and doing different functions there. We had some pieces of equipment there. We had a crane, which I ran the crane, and it seemed like every week, once or twice, a boat would come in, carry our supplies, and we have to offload the boat, and that's what we did with the crane. It was a mobile crane, and we just drive it from the base down to the dock and set it up and unload the boat. And then we'll bring in our food supplies and any other supplies that we had. There was also an airstrip on the base. It was just a one runway, and we had to take care of that. And we also had a couple of crash trucks that we had to drive those whenever a plane landed. We had to be ready. And we would set up in the crash truck, and nothing ever happened, but that was part of our duties. One of the things that we did before I'd gotten there, they had designed a septic system for the down at the air base. They had a septic system for the must have been a control tower, I guess it was. So I worked on putting that in. So the guy and I worked doing that, and then we took care of different things on the base. Base was actually pretty small. There was only when I first got there was a little over 100 people there on the base, and and their function was it was a listening station. And what it was, they had sonar that went out from the base. It went out into the water, and they could hear the screws on ships, miles and miles away, and they could tell what kind of ship it was, and they knew everything. Could tell where it was going, how fast it was going. And they knew exactly what it was. And that was in a building they called the T building, which was a highly classified building. Most of us couldn't get into that building. The only time I actually got in there was when we were actually demobilizing it. And I had to get special permission. They had to get me special permission that I could go in there. They must have checked background check or something.
So when I go back, you operated a plane. Where did you learn? So tell me about where you learned your skills.
Well, prior to this, I had worked for here in Norfolk for MF Malvo, and we did have a crane there, and I worked with the crane. I didn't do a lot with it, but when I got to San Salvador, I did have a little bit of knowledge, so I kind of learned myself, and from the guys there, because I did have some knowledge of it and of how things worked, and so it was a good job to do.
So that was a skill you already had. Did you learn any skills for operating equipment or anything else dealing with construction when you were in basic?
No, not at all. That was why all the people in our basic training had previous experience in construction. So that was a prerequisite to joining the CVs as an advanced rate. So you had to have some knowledge, and that's why I had to have letters from the people that I worked for that explained what I had done and so on and so forth. And so I was qualified in that manner. That was why we actually had to sign up for 2 years and 6 months instead of 4 years, which was the normal Navy enlistment time.
And CVs is a construction battalion. Can you tell me a little bit about the history and the function of the CV?
Well, initially the CVs, of course, were started during the Second World War. When they found that they were building bases out in the Pacific, and was being done by civilians, and then when they got into a war, the civilians couldn't defend themselves because it was against the Geneva Convention or whatever. So they formed the CVs and gave them some military training to go along with their already experience in doing stuff. So a lot of those people who had worked as civilians, I guess, probably became CVs, and that's how it actually got started. They kind of disbanded it and then reformed them again for the Korean War. And at that point, they did keep CVs on after that, and there was a small contingent of CVs located either in Davisville, Port Hueneme, or Gulfport. And during the Vietnam War, they increased the number of battalions, so there were quite a few battalions at one point or another for service in Vietnam to work on building bases there, work on the roads, runways, and all sorts of things like that.
How long were you at San Salvador?
Went there in September and left, I think, on the 1st of February, I think.
This was September
Of 69 and left in the 1st of February, 1970.
Now, did you tell me off camera that they decommissioned San Salvador
Yes.
base while you were there?
Yes, that was, I guess, the purpose. Other than working on the Public Works Department, we actually had to ship stuff out of there. So eventually, we shipped stuff out by boats or by planes. A lot of times, planes would come in and we'd load up these big airplanes that came in, and we'd load up equipment in there that was in the what was known as the T building. So they took all that electronics stuff out of there and things like that.
And then they closed that base down?
They closed it down and they turned it over to the Bahamian government at the time. And eventually, one time when I was several years afterwards, I was curling, as a matter of fact, and Hartley Mead had just joined the curling club. And Hartley was talking about having been to San Salvador. So I talked to him a little bit, and in his college, he went to Hartwick College, I believe, and as part of the college curriculum, they sent them down to San Salvador with other kids, and they spent like a semester there, and they did different things there. So and the place where they actually stayed was at the old base. And then since that, one of my friends at work was telling me about his son who was in college, and he went down to some place in the Bahamas, and I said, "Oh yeah, well, where was that?" It happened to be San Salvador also. And he took pictures, and I looked at the pictures and looked exactly like the pictures I had taken 40 years before that.
They may be sleeping in the same barracks.
Oh, they were. That's where they actually stayed. I don't know what if they changed them at all inside. They must have a little bit.
Once San Salvador was decommissioned, where was that?
From there, I was sent to Port Hueneme, California, and I was assigned to MCB3.
MC what?
MCB3, Mobile Construction Battalion 3.
What were your duties there? How long
So-
did you stay?
Well, when I first got out there, MCB3 was actually in Okinawa, and they had said to get ready that in a couple of weeks we would be shipping over to Okinawa to join the battalion. Well, somewhere along the line, they changed the orders and kept us there at Port Hueneme, so we stayed there until the summer of 70 when we actually joined it. The battalion came back and we actually joined them then. And that was when I worked on shipping and receiving, so I did a lot of different things there. One of my duties there also was on the weekends. I would have to take a Navy car and drive down to the airport down in Los Angeles and pick up somebody who was flying in, some dignitary or some officer or something like that. So I'd have to drive the car down there and pick them up. I'd have to get dressed up in, like dress uniform and go down, meet the person and bring them up and deliver them and turn the car back in. So that was some of the duties that were there. One time when we were there, a plane crashed out in the desert, a Navy plane, so we had to mobilize. We took a crane and a bulldozer and a dump truck, and a few of us went out there and recovered the plane. We actually had to pick it up piece by piece and put it in a trailer, and then they brought it back to the Naval Air Station, Point Mugu, which was near us. So that was interesting. And that took a few days to do. And we would drive back and forth out to do the job.
Did you live right on the base while you were?
Yes. Yeah. And then we had places once on the base there, we did do training. That's where I went to the well drilling school that I mentioned previously. Also, I went to several other schools where they would train you for a couple of weeks on different pieces of equipment, something they may not have been familiar with. Also, we learned, you could learn on the job training, working around the base. Someplace we put in a parking lot, so I actually learned to operate a road grader, which I'd never done before. So things like that, you pick up different trades, as you go along.
While you were at Port Hueneme, was it basically a 9-to-5 job of working, and then you were free to do what you wanted?
Basically, except you would have the duty, which you had to serve. You might have a watch or something in the evening after that period. And that would occur like every 7 or 8 days. And this is where the duty I had, like going to Los Angeles and picking people up at the airport.
When you were not on duty, did you have the freedom to leave the base and come and go as you pleased?
Oh, sure. I had driven my car out there, which was actually good. So yeah, we once weekends were basically ours, once you had the duty, and you could go do different things. Sometimes we went to baseball games down in Dodger Stadium. We went there. Sometimes a couple of us took a trip down to Tijuana. One time we went camping up in the Big Sur or somewhere up there, up in Northern California. So we were able to. You could get camping equipment and stuff like that. They had it available, so you could rent it, or they had it. You just had to sign up for it and you could get it. So 4 of us went up there one time. We had a pretty neat trip there going up there. That was a lot of fun.
After you spent the summer at Fort Wayne,
Well, once in the end of the summer, of course, we were in the battalion, so we did different training.
and once you were actually officially in the battalion, did you stay in California?
Yeah, for a while. No, we stayed there, and the battalion was training. So as part of that training, we went down to Camp Pendleton at the Marine base down in Southern California. We went down there for a couple of weeks and had training down there. This is where we actually went to the rifle range and learned shooting weapons and things like that. And also, at some point, I had taken mortar school, which was a mortar is kind of like a tube where it shoots up a shell that either provides lighting at night or it's a shell that explodes. So I went to that training, and part of that we did shoot live mortars down at Camp Pendleton.
In the weapons training, what arms did they train you on?
Basically, I had an M16 that was my weapon that I carried.
Now, at this point, did you know or did you think that you would be going to Vietnam?
Oh yeah, we knew that's what we were training for. That was the next deployment was to Da Nang and Vietnam. So that's where.
So this was your first weapons training. After that, did you then carry firearms?
Only when we went to Vietnam. We didn't have any. We didn't carry any weapons at all, except when we went to Camp Pendleton or in Vietnam.
What other things did you learn at Camp Pendleton?
Oh, different military stuff. We threw hand grenades.
Were you trained by Marines?
Yeah.
After that training, where did you go? Did you go back there?
And then we went back to Port Hueneme. And actually then we waited probably a month or so, and then we were shipped out to Vietnam in the beginning of November of 1970.
Did you have a chance to go home on leave at all before shipping out?
Yes, I did. Actually, fortunate enough, because I had a car there, they came out with some directive. They said, well, if you have a car and you're going to be bringing it home, they'll give you a week or so off to do that. So I didn't take my car home, but I went home.
You left your car in California?
Yeah, I left it. When I went to Vietnam, there was a place where you could store your car, and had to pay the guy $15 a month or something like that.
So you flew home to Vietnam?
So I flew home. Yeah, I was home for I think it was a little over a week, and that was good. We actually got to have Thanksgiving dinner sometime at the end of October, I guess it was. So.
Did you leave from Connecticut to go overseas, or did you go back up to California?
No, I went back to California, and then.
And then did you go as a unit?
Yes, yeah, we transferred as a unit over there. That was one good thing about the Navy. You always stayed with the guys who you trained with. So, with the Army, it was different. They would just ship people in to fill up their units. But we trained with these people, and we all shipped out as a unit. And what it actually was we, I think it was over the course of like 4 days, the whole battalion got shipped out. and I was on the last flight to actually leave to go back. So,
Did you fly directly to Vietnam?
well, let me see. We flew from Point Mugu, which was the base near Port Hueneme. We left from there and went to Hawaii. We stopped in Hawaii for fuel, I guess, and then while we were there, we were able to get off the plane and go and have a beer or something. So we did that, and then got back on the plane and went from there to Japan. And I think we just fueled up in Japan, and then went to Da Nang, Vietnam.
You landed in Da Nang. What was your first impression when you landed and got off the plane?
Well, it was. I was quite impressed by it. I guess it was so hot, of course, when we got there. Even though it was November, it was very warm and very humid. And then they loaded us onto some cattle cars, I guess we called them. They were like these trailer trucks that they had places in the back where you could just stand up, basically. So we all piled into there, and then they drove us from the air base to Camp Haskins South, is where we were staying. So it was kind of a different thing, definitely. In the first place, when we remember, the smell was, there was some kind of different odor that was there. That I don't think I could explain it, but it was kind of unique to that area, especially when we went through a place called Dog Patch, which was kind of where all the Vietnamese refugees might have stayed there or something. There was some distinct odor there. It was very unique to that place, I guess.
When you went to Camp Haskins, is that where you were going to stay, or was that just temporary?
No, that was our home port in Vietnam. So our whole battalion was assigned there. From that point, we got assigned to doing different jobs, and there I was put on the crane crew, which I was happy with that. So,
Can you tell me about Camp Haskins? How big was it?
well, there must have been 700 or 800 people in our battalion at the time. Might have been there. And it was divided into two sections. There was Camp Haskins South, which is where we stayed, and Camp Haskins North. And I don't think there was any other CB battalion there at that time. We wound up being the last full CB battalion to be stationed in Vietnam.
Was Camp Haskins completely 100% CDs?
Yes. Yep. Initially it was anyway. Then eventually, as we left there, when we did leave, it got turned over to the Army, I guess. If I remember right.
How long were you at Camp Haskins?
Well, I was stationed there until we left, which was in April. But then in the meantime, in those periods, would be sent out to jobs at different places. So we wound up, when I went to Quaviet, I wound up staying up there went there in January and left there in April. So I was there 2 or 3 months.
So tell me about Quaviet. Was that the first outside mission that you had?
No, actually, prior to that, I had gone down to, we were working on the roadway on Route QL1, which was like the main highway.
QL1?
QL, yep. And that was,
QL stands for.
darn if I know. But it was like the Vietnamese National Highway. It was like Route 44, about a road like that, it's like a 2-lane highway. And it traveled north and south in Vietnam. So initially we were working on that road, putting up head walls and things like that, where they had culverts going through the rice paddies. So I'd have to go out there with a crane and dig a hole and make a cofferdam, and we pumped it out and built concrete walls there. And then we just moved on to the next one. And that's where we stayed. We actually lived for a time. We lived with some Army guys. And they were in like a dugout into the side of an embankment like. And so we lived in there with them. And we first got there, this other guy and I stayed there, and these Army guys, they had their own chow and things like that, so they would have food and stuff like that. Our battalion must have paid them something to keep us there, you know. So anyway, they we were sleeping right next to where the kitchen was, and the cook one night, he had made some pies. He made a peach pie and an apple pie, I think they were. And the next morning, he said, "Hey, you guys ate my pies." And I said, "No, I don't think we ate your pies. I think those rats that were running in here in the middle of the night did." Because what happened, they had a generator that ran lights, you know. So at a certain hour, and I think it was like 9 o'clock or 9:30, they shut the generator off, so all the lights went out, and that's when we all went to bed. Well, as soon as the lights went out, and you could hear the motor just brrr, and all of a sudden you hear and these rats started running around the place. So this new guy was in the room with me, and I hear him lock and load his weapon. I told him, "God, whatever you do, don't start shooting that thing in here." He said, "What do I do? What do I do?" I said, "Pull the covers over your head. They'll go away." So anyway,
Didn't eat the pies?
no, the rats actually ate the pies, and they were totally gone. So we got blamed for it. So then after a while, we kind of wore out our welcome there, I guess, and we moved to a Marine base. I think it was called, I can't remember, LZ Baldy or something like that. And then, so we had our own little hooch there, and there was ourselves who worked there, and then we had a couple of other guys who were working on another job. So all of us stayed there in this one little hooch, and then we would get our chow there. So we used to, the thing with that, we had to get back early, because if you wanted to take a shower, the water was warm, because it was just pipes laid on the ground that the sun heated them up, so that was their hot water, so you had to get back early so you get a hot shower. And then, so we stayed there, and the only bad thing with that was it was a fire base, and in the middle of the night they would have some fire missions, and of course they'd shoot these huge cannons off, and the whole place just shook, and knocked stuff, we'd have stuff in our lockers and knock stuff off the walls, and it was tough sleeping there, but we endured. And then on the weekends we would go back to Da Nang and stay there at our normal place, you know.
When you go first with the Army and then at LZ Baldy, it wasn't your entire battalion. How big a group would go?
Oh, there might have been 8 or 10 guys, maybe. It was just what we would call a detachment.
And how they chose that detachment was based on what the work that needed to be
Yeah,
done?
they had different. There were some builders there who were working with the forms. Myself, I was a crane operator, and I had a guy who worked with me. He was like my assistant. And then there would be one person in charge. It would probably be a first class or a chief petty officer who's in charge of the group. And then they would build the forms and get it ready. Then the battalion would send down a load of concrete. They had their own mixers and stuff like that, so they would send it down. And we pour the concrete and then strip it a couple days and backfill it and move on to the next one.
After LZ Baldy, where did you go?
Then we were being sent to up to Quaviet, which was in the very northern part of Vietnam.
Up by the Vietnam War.
Yes.
How long were you there? What did you do? What was that like?
Well, our job there was to build a pier for the Vietnamese Navy. Quaviet was located right at the mouth of the Quaviet River. It was on the South China Sea. So we stayed. There's considerably more guys. There probably was 25 guys there. A lot of builders and people like that, but mostly builders. Few equipment operators. Then we had our own contingent. We had our own cook. Trying to think of what else. We had tents. We lived in tents there actually that were built up on. We built platforms up off the ground. And set the tents up on there.
Did that alleviate the rat problem at all?
Yeah, I don't recall any rat problem there. Actually, I don't. One thing there was snakes. That was almost every day we saw some snakes, which were a hand. I remember one day I was out running a bulldozer, and they came out to get me to bring me back in for lunch or something. And I could see something way off in the distance. I just saw this, like a wisp of dust or something rising up, and I couldn't figure out what the heck it was. So I kept watching it, and it kept moving. Well, couldn't find out it was this huge snake that was going along, and he was moving so fast. I just tried to get a bead on him with my rifle, and there was no way I could from that distance. But it was a good-sized snake, and he was really moving. I don't know where that wound up.
When you were building the pier at Claviette, did you stay there the whole time, or did you go back to Haskins around?
Went back to Haskins a couple times probably, just for the weekends or something. A couple times we had to go back for different things. I can't remember what. But, one time, because we were getting close to actually ending our tour there, we had to bring all our gear and get it ready to get shipped out. So we kind of went back one time for that. And we had taken our stuff and we had actually built a bunch of foot lockers out of plywood. So we put all our stuff in there and we brought it down there and then we shipped it all out.
Now, when you were out in the field working on the road, building the pier, were you in harm's way? Were you when you were with the Army and the Marines, were you in the combat zone?
Oh yeah, well at Quaviet we had been attacked one night by what they call sappers, and they came in while we were there. The river itself was being used to transport equipment for this Lam Sam 719 or whatever it was called, and they had a barge that was out there that was a barge that had a dredge on it, and they were dredging the river. So the ships, as they came up, of course, they were laden with equipment, so they were took a high draft or a low draft. I mean, and they had to keep the silt out of the way so they could run the boats up and down the river there. Anyway, one night they blew up this tugboat that was with the barge where the people who were working around the dredge, and that's where they actually lived. And they sunk this tugboat. And then they had also put a charge on the barge, on the dredge. So the captain on the dredge got up steam and he started heading towards shore. And sure enough, a few minutes later, a explosion went off on that, but he was able to beach it before it sunk. So he actually had it beached. But the tugboat sunk, and I think it killed like 7 people there that were on that. So we had barges that we had crane. We put one of our cranes on the barge, and we were actually driving pilings from that barge. And one night they blew that up, and it sunk down. And it actually, luckily, it just went down and rested on the bottom of the river. And the water was washing over it, but nothing happened. As far as the crane was okay, so but we had to get the crane off the barge because we couldn't move it then at that point. And we also had a problem with the crane when we had broken the transmission on it, so we couldn't drive it.
Well, it must have been quite an operation, how to get it off there.
Well, and this one guy was helping me. He was what they called an engineering aide, but he was a very capable guy. So he worked with me, and we took all our pile driving equipment off. We were able to put that ashore. And then we took and rigged up a block and tackle inside one of the boats that we had. It was a landing craft, so they dropped the bow of the landing craft down onto the barge, and we were able to winch ourselves off the barge onto this landing craft. That was kind of the last thing we did, because then we wound up taking that crane. We actually rode from there back to Da Nang in that landing craft with a crane.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Ronnie, were there any casualties in your unit?
There was none where I was actually with, but there were 3 guys from our whole battalion were killed during our stay over there. One of the guys was a construction mechanic, and he was on one of the detachments, and somehow he fell off a barge and he drowned in the river. There was another one where a guy was a second-class builder, and he was on another detachment, and this is in the very southern part of Vietnam, so this is way south of Da Nang, and they got attacked by the VC one night, and his hooch got hit by a rocket, and he was killed instantly there. Third guy was in a CB team, they had these small groups of CBs who would get together, about 13 guys, and they were always together all the time, and they would go to a particular place, and it was kind of civic action. Actually, they would work with people, helping them out. So he was riding in the helicopter, going back and forth to wherever he was, and the helicopter crashed, and he was killed. So those are the only 3 people that we actually lost.
So can you describe what a typical day, you can call anything typical, for you would be like when you got up in the morning, what you did throughout the day, before you went there?
Well, typically, say up in Qua Viet, we would get up in the morning. When I first got there, it was very, very cold. Cold and damp. Cold, it might have been 70, but it was so cold. I just felt so cold. And we had these little stoves we actually had inside our tent that we could, early in the morning, we would start a little fire in there to take away the coolness, So we would get up, and then the cook would have some breakfast. So we had a little tent set up for the cook and for a chow hall there, and so we would go in and have a little bit of breakfast. Whatever they had, I can't remember what they had. Some eggs probably, and depends. We had milk, so we might have had cereal and things like that, and coffee, of course. And then we would go on to whatever actually we were doing. At that point, when we were working on the pier, we would go out and we would drive another set of pilings out on the next bent, we called it. So we would set up some pilings, and then we would put the pieces on top of that, and then build a bridge over to that, Then the next day, you would drive out on that, and then you'd work on your next one. That way you worked your way out along the pier as you built it. So, and then, we would work on that in the morning, then we would have a break for lunch. The cook would cook something up. Depends on where we are. Food actually there was generally was pretty good food that he had. It was stuff that would come up from our base in Danang. Then we had coolers and refrigerators and stuff like that where you could keep some of it. Every once in a while, somebody would go back and bring up a load of food. And,
So when you were at the Claudette, you had 3 meals a day?
oh yeah,
They had a regular mess hall?
yeah, and that was actually we had some pretty good food there. Couldn't complain about it really. As I said, there was a cook who was assigned to us, and that's what he did. After we had been visited by the VC there a few times, they decided to send some Army guys up to help us with security. So these guys came out of the bush and they came up there. And the first night they were there, we were having steaks. Of course, they were used to eating probably sea rats and stuff like that, So, but we fed them with the food that we had. So they all sat down and had a nice steak dinner and stuff like that. So they were quite impressed by all that. One time, one of the trucks was coming back with some of the stuff loaded in it, and they were bringing some other gear back for us, and the truck ran off the road way up. This road was like 12 miles of like going down a Toby Pond. That was a road like that. So the guy who was driving and somehow ran off the road, and the truck was in a rice paddy. And 2 of the guys hitchhiked. Somebody gave them a ride, and they came down and told us that, hey, the truck is up there off the road. They can't get it out. So we went back up, and it took us a while to drive up there. We had a little small crane and a bulldozer and something else went up there. So we had to set up and try to get this truck back onto the road. The front end was still on the road, but the rear end had slid off the road and was in the rice paddy. They had a trailer with it. The trailer had tipped over, and we got there. You could see all the loaves of bread were like floating out in the rice paddy. all our food was gone.
Were you able to get it out?
Yeah, we got it out. And they didn't come get us till like 6 o'clock at night. So we headed right out there, and of course pretty soon it got dark. And we were able to. I was running a little crane. I couldn't pick up the whole thing, but I could pick up the back end a little bit, and I hooked onto it with a bulldozer and pulled it out. And I kind of picked it up, so we did get it out of there. Got it set back up, and then probably about 10 o'clock at night, we're driving back to our base. We're kind of in single file going down the road, and somebody started shooting at us at some point. That was kind of scary.
Well, I'm going to switch gears and ask you some questions about daily life in addition to your food. How did you stay in touch with your family when you were in Vietnam?
By letters?
Were you a good letter writer?
No.
The mail service was good?
Oh yeah, it was actually pretty good. I mean, I would write a letter maybe once a week or something like that. I written a letter to different people in my family. I remember one time my mother had sent a cake or something over there, and actually this was when I was in Claudette. So my buddy there, John McNamara, he was back at the main base in Danang, and he would go and make sure that my mail always got put in a sack going up to Claudette. So this cake, a big box came with a cake in it. So that got shipped up there, so we all had a piece of cake. And it actually didn't take too long to come from the U.S. It was, I bet, within a week's time or less. And so that was pretty neat.
Did you always have enough supplies, materials, construction materials that you needed? Were there shortages?
I would say, yeah, we did. For the most part, we had stuff that that we needed to do our job. Um, One good thing was maybe why we did have that might have been the reason why we did have good food. We were able to trade stuff off. And then when we were down at the down in Da Nang, it seems to me like every Sunday we would have a steak and lobster kind of dinner, like on Sundays. So they were able, and I think that was it. They traded off sheets of plywood or 2x4 or something to somebody, and they were able to get good food.
How did you handle the stress of the job?
Okay, I guess. I don't know. Sometimes it was stressful, I guess. Sometimes stuff would break down and we couldn't, like when the transmission broke down, we had to actually take it apart and we shipped the part back to Da Nang and they actually had to fix it there. And then ship it back up and we had to put it back together. So, I guess, I don't know. We're able to cope with things.
Did you do anything special for good luck?
Not that I can recall.
When you were not working, what did people do for entertainment?
Well, they had USO shows and stuff like that.
Did you see any?
Oh, yeah.
Did you call them?
As a matter of fact, I did see the Bob Hope show.
You did?
Yeah,
Where?
in Da Nang. That was right after we had first gotten there. We were there for a month or so. And, they had the show, and they had a lottery, like so many guys could go to see the show. Well, I didn't win the lottery or anything, but afterwards we all just piled in a bunch of trucks and we went down there. And they had set up bleachers, and people were sitting in the bleachers. Well, it was on a hill, so we were able to just go up behind the hill and sit on the ground and we watched the show. Yeah, it was you could see it very well and hear it. Excellent. It was what they called Freedom Hill, I think was where the place was.
What else did you do for entertainment?
Well, they would have USO shows that would come to our base in Da Nang. So there, maybe some night they would have a show, or on the weekends maybe something like that. And that was about it, really. I guess we probably played cards sometimes. Some of us would play cribbage and things like that.
Did you go on leave at all?
Nothing.
Did you have any leave on your
No.
So you didn't get to see anything else except for...
That's right. They did have, could apply for R&R. And you could go away for a week. So at one point you put your name in, but I never got to go anyplace. So.
You never got on with R&R?
Well, what they call it in camp, and even that, I wasn't supposed to take it, I guess, but I did.
So you stayed in camp?
Yeah. So actually, on our camp, there was right on in Vietnam. In Da Nang, was right on the beach. So they had a nice beach and stuff there, so we could go to the beach. But there wasn't much to do there. You couldn't. We could not go off base. We had to be, if we were in the Da Nang area, we had to be in our base by 6 o'clock that night. And that was it. You couldn't go off to go into the city or anything like that. It was all off limits.
What was your opinion of the officers?
Oh, we had some good officers. Nice people. One time, we used to wear on our uniforms, we used to wear what they here on your shirts. You'd have your rank here and also on hat. So one day, December guy and I had gone to Freedom Hill, which was a big exchange there, and we were driving in, and this Marine was a gate guard there, and he snaps a salute to us. We thought it was kind of odd, he's saluting us from the enlisted pukes. So he said, hey, you don't have to salute us, we're, like you. We're just an enlisted. So then I figured out that maybe that signal on my hat and on my thing, I might have, tipped them off, thought we were officers. So after that, I didn't wear them anymore. So my lieutenant had asked me, said, well, how come you're not wearing your crows? And I told him I didn't want to get mistaken for an officer. Because, the officer could be, a target, so.
Was he okay with that?
Yeah, he accepted my explanation.
What was your opinion of your fellow sailors? Or Stevie's in your case?
Yeah. Well, there were a lot of them there were very talented, and a lot of them were BS artists too, but I mean, that was typical of any place. But for the most part, most of them did know their job and could do it well.
Do you recall your last day of Vietnam?
Yeah. Actually, we had to gather at there was a recreational area. It was like a basketball court, outside basketball court. So we gathered there. And they loaded us onto these cattle cars again to take us to the air base. We had to be there. We left there actually like at 10 o'clock at night. So it was dark. When they drove us down in these cattle cars, at that point we didn't have any weapons. We had turned all our weapons in, so we had no weapons. The only ones that had weapons, we had some guards who were on the cattle cars with us and stuff, so that they carried weapons, but we didn't have any. So anyway, we go down to the air base to wait for a plane, and we were supposed to go on a Flying Tigers plane. So as soon as we got there, this what they call the Stretch 8. It was a DC-8. They had actually made them longer so they could carry more people. And Flying Tigers plane landed. And we figured, we're ready. Get out of here. And, well, that wasn't our plane. So we wound up. We stayed there, and we just slept on the tarmac of the airport. And the next morning we went down and had breakfast at their chow hall there or something. And actually, we didn't leave until 8 o'clock the next night. So we spent a whole day, over almost 22 hours, I guess, waiting just for the plane to come in.
It must have been painful.
So, yeah. Then we see another plane come in. No, that's not ours. And so it kind of painful. But then when we got on, and we were out of there and headed up, and that was it. And then we went from there to Yokota, Japan, and we spent the night in Yokota in some barracks there. Then the next morning, we got back on the plane and flew from there into San Francisco, and then from San Francisco down to Point Mugu, where then they met us there with a bus. So they were going to take us back to the base, and then they said, it was early in the morning when we got there, and they said, well, the bus will take you down to the airport because we already had our tickets to go home. So
you could go directly home?
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you discharged at that point?
No.
Leave?
Yes. So we had made all those arrangements. So we actually, and our utilities, which was unheard of, we actually got on the plane and I flew into Hartford.
What was your homecoming like in Connecticut?
Well, trying to remember how. I guess. Oh, I know. When we got down to Los Angeles, I called them up and told them, I should be home by 5 o'clock that night, I guess. So they had my mother and father had some plans to go somewhere else, but they canceled them. And then they came and picked me up. And it was interesting. It was, it was strange because we were able to not travel in dress uniform. So it was good to be home and get out of there. One strange thing that happened, I remember when we got into the LAX, the airport in Los Angeles, that I guess I went in to shave or something because we hadn't shaved a couple of days or something. So we go into the men's room, and there was some, I don't know how it was shaped, but I walked around the corner and I could see NEN, and I walked in and I said, wow, boy, this smells very strange. No, I didn't think anything of it. I looked around, some ladies that I would walk into the ladies' room, woman. Luckily, it was early in the morning, so there wasn't many people. Oh yeah, and I found them.
So technically, you were still on active duty.
Oh yeah.
How long did you get to stay home before you had to return?
Probably a couple of weeks, I guess. And then I went back to Port Hueneme and
Fort where?
Hueneme
How long did you stay there?
and stayed there until November. 1st of November, I got out. And but when I went back, then I got my car out of storage, and then I had my car. But that was then I was just kind of hanging around because I didn't participate in any of the training and stuff like that they had.
You had any duty?
Yeah, I started out, I was a bus driver. So some of it, I'm trying to remember what I did. We had what they called military transportation, and we would drive school buses or something like that would carry the other CBs who were in training back and forth to different classes that they had or different training functions. So then you would work there. You'd start either at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you worked till 12, or you started at 12 and worked till 6 o'clock at night. And I mean, it was, first thing in the morning you make a run, and then they had a pool table set up in there. You play pool for the rest of the day. So it wasn't too enlightening, but it was something to do, I guess.
And then you were discharged November 1st. You
Yep.
recall your last day of service?
Oh yeah.
What was that like?
Well, I said goodbye to my buddies, and I had 2 other guys riding with me at that point when we left the base. One of them, of course, we had all our stuff piled into the car. The car must have been like this, So, and one of them I took down to the airport in Los Angeles and dropped him off, and he caught a plane. The other guy lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I drove him home, and once we left there, we drove all the way straight through, and I spent the night in Santa Fe. And then I left from there on my own, headed east. So then it took a couple days from there, I guess. I stopped a couple places and spent the night. I think we got discharged on a Monday, and I think I was home on Thursday. Sometime on Thursday, I guess.
What did you do in the days and weeks immediately following your discharge?
Well, not too much. Eventually, I got a job at that point with Standard Cycle, driving a trailer truck hauling oil. So that's what I did for that first winter. And then the next spring, then I went to work with Marvel, then with Marvel and construction, and then in the summer and with after the summer and the fall, I went back to school in Wentworth Institute in Boston.
What institute?
Wentworth.
Wentworth? Did you go back to school on the DIL?
Yes.
What did you study at Wentworth?
Civil and highway engineering.
And you already had a lot of training in that, so.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And so you graduated from Wentworth?
Yep. 1974. Associate's degree. It was a 2-year school. Yep.
What did you do after that?
Let's see. Then I worked with NF Marvel for a while. Then I worked for another contractor down in Georgetown, Connecticut. And then I went back to NF Marvel. Worked for a couple more years, and then in 1984 I went to work for the state of Connecticut, the Department of Public Works. That's where I've been ever since.
Did you make any close friendships while you were in the service?
Oh, sure.
You maintain any of those friendships?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, one of my best friends is John McNamara. He lives in Southbury here in Connecticut, so I see him quite often. One of my other friends, Pat Pennell, lives out in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I've been out there numerous times to visit him. So my other friends that I showed you pictures of before down in South Carolina, William Ford and Milton Winslow. Been visited with them on and off for the past 40 years, I guess.
Have you attended any reunions?
Yes. Yeah, went to several reunions. One might have been in 2000 maybe, or I think it was 2000. We went to the first one that MCB3 had. And it was in Las Vegas. And John McNamara and myself went to that. And then we were able to, from there, we had rented a car and we drove out to Port Hueneme, so we were able to take a look at the base out there. And they went to go on the base. And so I met with this woman who was she must have been security there, at the police department there, so a civilian. And, told her I wanted to just see what it looked like. And she said, well, we can't let you on the base, but as long as you got your golf clubs, you can say you're going to play golf. So I said, yeah, I got my clubs. So I was able to go on and drive around. And,
Have it changed?
oh, yeah, considerably at that point. And then one of the time they had the reunions every year, MCB3 reunions, and they have them in different parts of the country. And one year they had it at Cape Cod, so I went to that. Then another year they had one in Rhode Island, so I went to that. And then last year I went out. They had it at Port Hueneme actually, so I went out to that, and that was pretty good. I went with John and myself and his family, his wife and son, and we took the train out there. So we made a big tour of the country, actually. So that was a lot of fun.
Ryan, how would you say your military experience influenced your thinking about war and military in general?
Well, it certainly gives you another light to people who haven't experienced it, have no idea of what it's like to be thrown someplace that you know no one. You're kind of got to make friends pretty quick. People you don't really know at all. And you're dependent on those people to. Your life actually depends on them. And their lives depend on you doing your job and doing what you're supposed to do.
How would you say your service affected your life?
Oh, definitely had an impact on my life. I actually kind of looked forward to going into, at the time, to going into some kind of service. You know, it was just that it was interesting, and obviously I went places I never would have gone. You know, um, and definitely influenced my life, and I made some friends from it, and have continued those friendships.
Have you joined any veterans organizations?
Yeah, I belong to the VFW, and I belong to Island X1 Connecticut, which is a CV Veterans of America, which we meet in Torrington once a month.
Are you active in any of their activities?
Uh, other than going to well, I go to the meetings, and once in a while they'll have a poppy sale or something. I participate in that, but not really too active in it. But I was actually a founding member of the island, I guess you'll call it that.
So, Island,
Yes, Island X1.
what is the X1 for?
Well, back in the Second World War, they wouldn't tell people where they're going, and that's you're going to Island X. So that was how they kind of made up that name. So there are the CV Veterans of America there's a whole bunch of Island X1 in Connecticut, Island X1 in Rhode Island. There's umpteen X islands in New York State, and different places like that.
So Ryan, think back, is there anything, any other memorable experiences that you can recall that we haven't covered in this interview?
I'm sure there is, but I can't think of any at the moment.
Well, I'd like to thank you for the interview and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you.